Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm John Panapinto, and as you may know, I love movies. So, what I decided to do this year was to watch all of the Oscars Best Picture nominees so that you don't have to. Today, we're going to be discussing two films that kind of flew under the radar as we led up to Oscar season: Triangle of Sadness and All Quiet on the Western Front. One, a remake, and the other, maybe shouldn't have been made. All Quiet on the Western Front has 9 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best International Feature Film, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Visual Effects, Best Cinematography, Best Production Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Original Score, and Best Sound. And the other, Triangle of Sadness, has only 3 nominations, which some might argue is still too many: Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. How? We're going to find out. Today, our guest is Nick Safier, the only one of my guests who might love movies as much as me. We're going to discuss these movies and why I liked some that he didn't like. So let's get into it and welcome Nick. Hi, Nick.
Hey John, how you
How
doing,
are
bud?
you? How are
I'm
you?
doing, I'm doing good, bud. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I wanted to bring you on because you're like my Oscars guy. All of
We,
my other friends don't care about these movies. I barely got Danielle and Frank to care. My brother
yeah,
had seen the one I asked him about already. So
yeah.
these experimental ones, you're my guy.
We've been in every rehearsal that we've been in. I've been making sure to come to you and be like, hey, did you see this one? And to
Yeah,
have my
yeah,
daily check in to make sure that I'm not that I'm not alone in watching some of these movies. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
Um, so today we're gonna be talking about two of them.
Right.
Uh, two of the more outliers. So I'm gonna start
Yeah.
with let's start with All Quiet on the Western Front.
Okay. Cool.
Okay,
All right.
we're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna start with All Quiet on the Western Front, and
Okay.
this was one of the ones that I was. I'll be honest. When they were making the announcements of the nominees, I was sitting there with my fingers crossed, going, "Please don't nominate this." Then I have to watch it. I was like, "Please don't." I'm not an army movie guy.
Yeah.
I'm not a foreign film guy. I was like, "Please don't nominate this movie." I read the book when I was in college. I didn't remember it. Just getting ahead of it.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? It's 3 hours war movie in German. I had a day. I was like, let me just knock it out. It was the first
Right.
one I did. I was like, let me just watch it.
That was the first one you watched?
Well, outside of ones I watched already because I just wanted to
Sure.
see it.
You're just seeing them. Yeah.
And I started watching it in English. It's on Netflix. There's an English dub. It's very bad. It's like watching an old Godzilla movie where they're just speaking English and the words don't match. Um, and so I watched it in German, and I have to say, I know we have maybe well, I don't want to say I really loved it. I
Mm,
really loved it, and I
mm.
thought to myself, well, this movie deserves to be in this category. Um, what are your thoughts? What were your thoughts? You did you see it early on as well?
I did. My so most of them, and besides the ones that I've seen in theaters, I've knocked out with my family. Just randomly going through like between that and a couple of the other ones. And funny story, like that you mentioned the English dubbing because my when we were watching it, out of the first 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, my family and I are watching it, and we're like, "What's wrong with the TV?" Because the set like the we were like, why are they talking, not with the dialogue? And so my grandmother goes up and starts banging the TV set, thinking like that's gonna help it out.
It always
And
does.
no, it didn't work until we realized that we were watching it in English when we should be watching it in German.
There you
And so
go.
then we switched it over. And yes, I mean, so the 10 minutes of the beginning of the movie to the rest of the movie in German, the German was far better, far
Yes,
better.
yes.
But it was still like, how to describe? It was like I'd seen this is I think the second or third remake of this movie, I think,
Mhm.
or I don't know how much it's
Yeah, I think
similar.
there's been 2 or 3. Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah. So and I am a war movie guy, and like my dad is, so I enjoy I enjoy a good war movie, but I was just like not into it.
Yeah,
I like most of it, like it just didn't really for me build. I will say, like I know it's nominated for a bunch of things, but like and best cinematography is one of them. And I would peg this for sure for best cinematography. I thought it was like beautiful and it was
yeah.
outstanding. Yeah.
It was
But
gorgeous
overall,
looking. Yes, it was.
yeah,
Outside of
and
it
it was
being incredibly gray, but that's,
Right.
you know,
Right. But you also said, I think when we talked about this before, that, you really felt like you were there, and it
yeah,
was like they did a great job sensorially of making you, like so much that they included in this one. I was like, wow, I feel like I'm actually like on the war front right now.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was almost like, it's weird to compare them. It was almost like Avatar in that way, where you
Yeah.
really felt like there was not a second where you thought to yourself, "Oh, this is a soundstage," or "This is a guy with a camera here." This movie felt like you were there. I mean,
Yeah.
you felt like you were watching not a story, you were watching history,
Right.
which is
Right. That's a
says a
good point.
lot. I mean, there's a lot of movies like that, but this one really immersed you. And I can get why you didn't get into it necessarily, because it doesn't tell you typically what a three chapter structured story would be.
Right.
It was very raw and very real and very real life experience in the war. I mean, there were characters that you meet, and in a movie like Saving Private Ryan or Forrest Gump, even, which is partly a war movie at times,
Right.
you know, you meet this character and you're like, I know this character is going to die, but you learn about them, you go through some X, Y, and Z with them, and then eventually the moment comes where they're gone and you're sad.
Right. Right.
This movie was just like, here's a person, and you get all of that in 1 minute, and you're like, oh, here's a person who I know is going to be an important part of the story, and then they're dead a second later, and you're like, well, what? Like what? Because it's
Yeah.
not telling you a fictionalized version of what happened. It's trying to tell you a fictional story within a very real lens
Yeah.
of what goes on. I mean, there are things, spoiler wise, not even to get into it, but there are things where you're like, oh, like this is X, Y, and Z happens, and you're like, cool, and then something happens that's unrelated to the war completely, and you're like, oh, that's how this character goes, and you're like, oh, it's terrible. Like,
Right. No, and I agree. And that was, and there's like a plus to that also in my mind, like, how you think someone's going to be like that unpredictable aspect of it, where
yeah,
you think someone's going to be an important character and then they're just gone. And it's like that fragility of it, that is really, really cool. But I kept thinking the entire movie, is this like trying to be like 1917, like what, like in terms of like where that was a similar one in my mind, where you are invested in a character or several characters to an extent, but it's so much more about the context and the journey than it is the specific character and their like them personally. So it reminded me a little bit of that. I just was not invested because I didn't care about I guess the characters as much, because like there was no build for them, so maybe like I don't know, maybe if I approached it within that lens of like looking at it more from the journey of the war front as opposed to
the character.
like the character. Yeah,
It did
so
just start them off right away. I mean, it really
right.
kicked them off with just, here we go. Is one moment. I think there's one scene that doesn't take place like during the war. Um, but I thought it was a very interesting take on a very. I felt at the end, having watched it, especially since I was not that interested.
Mm,
I felt bad, as you're supposed to probably, about it. Said so much about the senselessness of war,
mm,
especially, and this is kind of a spoiler, but it's not, whatever. Like they throw that text in there at the very end, if you remember, that says basically that the whole movie you just watched was over a course of 3 years or something like that,
mm.
fighting over 2 miles of land that meant absolutely nothing to anyone. It was just
Completely.
one country trying to claim this 2 miles of land, and all these people died, and this terror and horror that you watch in this movie was over literally nothing. And that was really what happened. I mean,
Right.
and so
Right.
that's the kind of thing that ends it on such a, again, I don't think that's supposed to be a spoiler, I don't know, that ends it on such a strong message of like how senseless all of this can be, and that really worked for me.
Yeah.
um and it's a hard movie to watch, but
Mm,
I can totally get why they do no particular typical character development. And I'd have to watch some of the original. I know it was, like you said, a remake. They've done it a couple times. I'd have to watch some of the originals to see how they did it differently.
sure.
But compared to some movies, I felt like it held it deserves its place in the discussion.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what you're saying about, especially even in the beginning, like, just because this is another quality of it that I did enjoy, especially because it happened so abruptly, is, like, talking about, like, along with the senselessness was the manipulation of the young and the innocent, and how, like, they start off. And I know that's like a very common storyline or trope with war movies, like, losing your innocence on the war front kind of thing. But they really, did it in such a grotesque kind of way where, you start off and there it's like even the lighting is so shiny when they're in Germany signing up and whatnot, like the boys that are going to be a part of this, and then instantly they're there, and they're like, this is not what we were told was the vibe.
Yeah, yeah.
This is not it.
They play that really well. That really resonates right at the start that they were totally duped and they know it right away. So speaking of being duped into 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 something and not necessarily belonging in the conversation,
A
let's move
great
on to our next film. Let's move on to our next film, which is Triangle of Sadness. Triangle of Sadness is not a foreign film per se,
No, yeah.
But it's clearly from I don't even, what is it, European? I don't even know what, it's got a European sensibility to it. It's only got one movie star, quote unquote. Woody Harrelson has
Right.
a very memorable yet small part in it, and it has something to say for sure, but I don't know about its way of saying it. I don't know if that's for me. So what did you think of Triangle of Sadness?
Well, I do want to say that I think it's so funny to me because out of all the movies that you and I have talked about that's up for this season, I think we have talked about this movie the
Yeah,
most. Not
absolutely.
purposefully so, just like, in random parts of conversations, it has come up. But it is, that this is an example to me. And I know you just did like some of the other movies as well, that like where this what my argument with it will stand with them as well, that it I don't know if it's magical realism. I don't know if it's like, absurd, like, starting off more realistic and then it gets more absurd as the story goes on. But I was really, and we may vary on this, I'm excited if we do. But I was really into this movie for the first two acts. I loved it. Dark comedy kind of vibe, and it's like, a lot talking about societal structure and everything. Um, and I thought it was so good, and then it just gets more and more absurd, but like, for me, it loses the story a bit, that's kind of, and I don't want to spoil, but like by the third act I'm just like what am I on right now,
Yeah. Well, we could discuss, we could spoil it a little bit because it is in the log line of the movie.
right.
I mean, so the movie's it's a three act structure. It's about societal structure, as you put it, of taking the rich down a peg, right? And so the act one is about a rich couple, and the act two is the rich couple on the boat, and then there's the something that happens on the yacht that leads to act three, where they're stranded on an island.
Yeah.
And the way that the structure of society and the way that the hierarchy of power shifts when you're suddenly stripped of everything and now you're left with nothing, and the people who always had nothing now know more about how to survive than the people who had the things pulled away from them because they never had to survive with nothing. And this is, again, I said this about another movie earlier, that if I was, it was Tar. If I explain it to you, this movie, you're gonna go, oh, that sounds great. I explained this whole movie to Frank, and he was like, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Then you watch it, and it's not great. To me, it had. You look at it and you say to yourself, I know what this movie's trying to say, and I appreciate what this movie's trying to say, and I appreciate how it's saying it. But the way that it's structured was a little too madcap for me.
Agreed. Yeah.
I mean, the the borderline body horror that this movie suddenly goes and takes a 20-minute tangent to just show just crassness and gross
Yeah.
basically potty humor, you know, which is something to, it's obvious when you're watching it that it's not just potty humor.
Right.
There's a clear point to what you're seeing.
Right.
But I remember looking at, I texted you while I was watching it and I went, this is a best picture movie.
Yeah.
Just people on the bowl. Like I was like, this is awful.
No, but that, and and that's so funny. I remember because like that's like and maybe it's just like I just find it humorous that like and that this part of the movie, that part that you're talking about, which we can talk, I think we can talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
it, that leading into, and again, without saying anything that happens, but it's in the middle of a storm in the on the like overseas, and and it's just like Woody Harrelson, after this with that, I forget the actor's name who he's with, but he's been in a lot, man. But
Yeah.
he, one of the passengers on the boat, they're just, sitting there having scotch after scotch, and just Woody Harrelson just plastered. And like this is completely on the nose. We talked about it, like, how it's just like, all right, I know what's happening here, and I don't know how good the writing is in this point, but I don't care,
Yeah.
because it's like they're talking about I think it was a communism versus capitalism. I don't even
It was
remember.
like Marxism versus socialism. Something like,
Something
yeah.
like that. And just like, but just Woody Harrelson, like, like not blinking for 3 minutes straight, just talking about this and not making a single point whatsoever, just plastered. Hilarious to me. I was just like, give me 3 hours of this alone. And like, I like, not for best picture. I was just like, I want this.
You can watch it. Yeah. It's funny to me. That scene read so much to me like a college student in a sociology class thinking they know everything about like life philosophy, just going on. And I was the kid in the front row, just rolling my eyes, being like, okay, stop talking. I don't care what you think about this. I could see the writers just being like, oh, this is so cool. I'm like, no, like, oh, stop it.
No, you're hammering it in. No, yes, but that was like, so, and like, but that whole part, yes, it was the, not just that, but I think the build up to what you were, it's just like, it does not, it's shock value in my view, like, and it just is out of nowhere, and it just, but like, and it kind of just takes that turn where it's like, what between the first act to the second act to the third act, yeah, it's all completely different. It gets more and more, I'd say, absurd as it goes along.
Yeah.
But it just is, I don't know, it just didn't flow to me, and like it just did, it felt like it was three different movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's how I mean, like, I enjoyed parts of it, but that's kind of how I felt about it.
Yeah. I will say, in its defense, though, I have not stopped thinking about it since I watched it.
Yeah.
And that is that's a very nice watermark for a movie. When you watch it and you can't stop thinking about what it's trying to say, that movie for certain stuck with me in that way. That I was like, it's just so many pieces of it do work well in their point, in their intention, that you're like, yeah, I want to give it way more credit than it probably deserves.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, do you think that the because I think when we've talked about it before, do you think that it is that there was more, I guess, that that's deeper with it because of, I guess, that that absurdist quality to it, that we like beyond the the rich versus poor theme of it all?
Sure. I do think so. I mean, it's a lot of these movies, and I've said this now a few times in this series of videos we're doing, a lot of these movies share a certain quality, which is that the movie is so absurd. But when you chip away at that absurdity, what it's trying to tell you is very straightforward and very simple. And they're using that absurdity as the crux to get the message to you. Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
Simple story about family. Absurd movie. This very simple story about rich versus poor in an absurd thing. Banshees of Inisherin. It's a story about friendship, family. It's a story about friendship and and your relationship to each other told through this weirdo lens of like, what is this story I'm looking at?
Hmm.
They're all a lot of them are that way. So I definitely think there's a lot more deeper to it than just the 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 hierarchy stuff. You know,
Yeah. Well, but
um,
I mean, what it's interesting though that I mean, and I wasn't sure how much you wanted to talk about like the other movies beyond these, but just within the context though that it's you can sort of see a theme not just for this year, but I'm wondering between this year and then in the last now within the context of just the Oscars this year versus the previous years. More and more movies seem that are getting nominated seem to be that to have that kind of equality. So I don't know exactly what I like. Magical realism is the one that comes to my mind, like a new like era of that kind of or surrealist kind of films
yeah,
that are getting that kind of appreciation at the Oscars, where it's kind of cool, where they have like this independent kind of quality to them where like it's like that this would not get made by a big budget studio, no way,
absolutely.
but it is because I think they're learning from to some extent from some of the maybe smaller studios that are getting nominated for these kind of I mean like same thing with Parasite in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
I mean like more and more of these movies seem to be, I mean, this is the most nominations I remember in history, and at least since I don't remember the last time there's been 10 movie
It was a
nominations for.
few years. Yeah, it was the last couple of years haven't been 10. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting to like, like this one, Triangle of Sadness, reminded me a lot of how I felt with Everything Everywhere All at Once. And again, that's not to say what I think in terms of those movies individually, but just like that quality of it, where where like you talked about Everything All Everywhere All at Once the other day. The simple storyline, simple like
Yeah.
like mother daughter relationship. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
I want to end this by asking you a question that I didn't have not asked any of my other guests because they haven't been as knowledgeable of the whole picture as you have. In a very concise answer,
Sure.
what would be your pick that you think deserves to win Best Picture and that you think is going to win Best Picture?
What I think is going to win, and do I think it is worthy of it? For sure. Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think is going
Okay.
to win. Yeah, that's what I say. Yeah.
Okay. And that would be with the one you think also deserves it.
From what's nominated,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Tightly with Banshees.
Okay. Okay.
You've made me look at Banshees very differently.
Yeah.
And like, which is great. Like I had a great time watching it, but yes, but I think Everything Everywhere All at Once is going to take it.
Okay. Very interesting. All right. Well, thank you, Nick. I really appreciate it. And we will talk soon.
Yeah, for sure, bro.
Well, that's all I got for you today. I want to thank my friend Nicholas Safier for joining me and talking about these films. Please be sure to follow me at The Man with the Black Glasses or at The Nothing Pod on Instagram. Find me on Facebook. Find me on Twitter. Find me on the street. Whatever you want. Let me know if you guys like this kind of thing and you find it fun to interact with. Let me know, and I'm happy to do more. I love doing this kind of stuff because I like to share with you guys what it is that I'm passionate about. And as you know, I can get pretty passionate. So I want to thank you guys for joining me. Please be sure to look out for other episodes, or if it's in the future, they're live right now, and they're all right here on the feed. See you next time.